Hello and welcome. You're watching News 18 Global and I'm Poonam Burde. We're talking about the G7 summit that is happening, that is going to happen over the weekend in Hiroshima in Tokyo. Now in Japan, I beg your pardon. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi departed for Japan's Hiroshima this morning. He is going to be attending the event, the summit, as a special invitee. He is expected to address the sessions of the G7 summit. They are primarily going to be about peace, stability, gender equality as well. Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, the president, is also going to be there. So Ukraine and the Russia war is going to be of primary focus as far as the G7 summit goes. Remember, Japan, which is hosting the G7 summit this year, has invited India as a special guest, as a guest country. External Affairs Minister of India has said that India has established a global reputation, and the fact that now Prime Minister Modi is going to be meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky as well, that only elevates India's stature as far as the global order is concerned.
So for the longest time, these Pacific islands were out of radar for Indian foreign policy makers. But from 2014, we have seen a drastic change. Perhaps for the first time, India participated in a conference. Now, Prime Minister Modi is going to be in your country on 22nd of May. And in fact, he's also going to have meetings with the heads of the states. And there's also a possibility of bilateral meetings with each one of them. How do you look at this visit? And also, how do you look at world's viewpoint changing for these Pacific islands?
Well, you see, this is the very important occasion for Papua New Guinea and the Pacific.
Okay.
There are 14 Pacific Island countries in the region. And of course, Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji is visiting Papua New Guinea and the Pacific for the very first time, particularly in Papua New Guinea. And with a 10 million population of Papua New Guinea and a bigger nation in the Pacific, we look forward to Prime Minister Modi's visit because that enhances Papua New Guinea's bilateral relations with the great India and, of course, the Pacific countries. It is also very important because when you look at the Indo-Pacific region, India is very much part of this region. Hence, it is important that we look at India as a great friend and a brother so that our development aspirations can be seen in the light of India's Look East and Act East policy, which is the bedrock of India's policy towards the Pacific.
Now, the G7 summit is happening, but on the sidelines are very important bilaterals that are slated for the Prime Minister. Also, what is important is that Prime Minister Modi is going to be meeting with the Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky. The Russia-Ukraine war is going to be the dominant part of the discussions as far as the G7 summit is concerned. All of the G7 nations have taken a strong, united stand against Russia's invasion. There are more sanctions that are expected over this summit. A likely announcement on those sanctions is also expected over the weekend. German government has announced a 2.7 billion euro package of military aid to Ukraine. It's the biggest package since Russia's invasion. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has also unveiled several new sanctions against Russia. The aid, the military support to Ukraine, meanwhile, continues. United States has also promised new sanctions aimed at disrupting Russia's ability to get war material and to close the loopholes that are used to evade these particular sanctions. Now, they would cut off roughly all entities from Russia, at least 70 of them. However, a key task for Ukraine's supporters will be to convince leaders like Prime Minister Modi and India to maintain a more neutral stance over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Remember, India shares its relationship with Russia as well as far as our trade is concerned. That really hasn't changed, but we have managed to keep a balancing act between the two countries. Meanwhile, Ukraine has successfully used the Storm Shadow missiles that were provided by the United Kingdom in their war against Russia. Maria, my colleague, now joining us from on ground there in Hiroshima, where the summit is going to take place. And Maria, Ukraine is going to be a dominant subject there, not just as far as the G7 summit goes, but also the fact that the Prime Minister of India is going to be meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky.
That's right, Poonam, and this will be the backdrop of this entire summit. The fact that this summit is taking place in Hiroshima, it becomes even more important. The reason why Prime Minister Kishida, who comes from the city of Hiroshima and also represents Hiroshima in the Japanese parliament, has chosen Hiroshima because he wants to tell the world that this is what devastation causes, that this city, which stands on the ruins of what happened on 6th of August 1945, should realize, the world should watch this Genbaku doom and think that this would happen if there would be a nuclear war. When that meeting takes place between Vladimir Putin, in fact, Mr. Zelensky and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, it becomes important because Zelensky would certainly press upon Prime Minister Narendra Modi to take a position which is moving away. Perhaps the needle should move away from what has been a tightrope walk for India so far to coming against Russia. India understands fully well and has managed to communicate effectively ever since the war began over a year and a half back, that India understands that West is going ahead with the sanctions, but India cannot take a position against Russia, although India has said that this is not an era of war. I'm going to emphasize a little more about where I am, Poonam, because I think it becomes extremely, extremely important, the symbolism behind choosing Hiroshima. I'll ask my camera person to zoom in and show the Genbaku Doom. These ruins today are the most realistic and image which stands today, and it has been carefully preserved by the people of Hiroshima. Several of them have been survivors of the atomic bomb that exploded over the city in 1945. If you speak to the survivors, all of them have just one message to the world leaders. They want a roadmap to come from here, that there should be a Hiroshima declaration, that all these countries would believe in nuclear non-proliferation, that they would arrive at a possible conclusion of nuclear disarmament. Whether that would be possible or not, we are not too sure, because let's not forget that G7 doesn't have a charter, neither does it have a secretariat. It is always the country which holds the presidency, decides the agenda, and Japan this time has decided an agenda that they want to have a strong message, strong condemnation to come particularly against Russia, because it has been issuing open threats in the context of nuclear war. So I think when Zelensky comes here and he interacts with world leaders, the members of the G7, and also 8 other countries who form the Indo-Pacific, and they are seen as the voices of the global south, where the role of India becomes particularly important. Zelensky would be stressing upon the fact of how his country has been devastated because of Russia. Expect more sanctions is what sources are telling us from the American camp, and also from Japan within, Prime Minister Kishida's camp, that there would be a strong message that will be coming from this G7 that is going to begin in Hiroshima.
And on the sidelines of that, Maria, there are several other bilaterals that are slated for the Indian Prime Minister as well. So it's not just this particular summit and a united agenda, of so to say, but Prime Minister strengthening India's ties with several other countries is also something that is going to happen over this weekend.
Yes, that's right. Emmanuel Macron is the French president. He will be meeting the Prime Minister on the sidelines. That's one of the bilaterals which has been scheduled. So is a bilateral with Prime Minister Kishida. Because if you remember, Poonam, Prime Minister Kishida had traveled to New Delhi a month back, and that is when he extended an invitation to Indian Prime Minister that he should participate in the outreach sessions which will be taking place of G7. India, of course, is not a member of G7, but there has been talks that because of India's growing stature in the Indo-Pacific and being the face of the global south in the post-COVID world, there is a need to expand G7 and make it a G10 nation, or a probable D10 nation, because it is about democracy, 10 countries who actually signify the democratic principles. But I think the big imagery that will be happening, Poonam, will be coming from here where I am, which is the Hiroshima Memorial Peace Park. It will be here that the Gandhi bust will be unveiled by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The face of Indian democracy will be unveiling the biggest apostle of peace and establishing Gandhi in Hiroshima, the city which was devastated in 1945. 78 years later, we will be seeing that establishment of Gandhi here. Because as we see often that Prime Minister has emphasized on the fact that Gandhi and his principles and ideals have become far more relevant because of the troubled times and difficult times that the world is witnessing because of this ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. I would also emphasize on one point here, Poonam, that Prime Minister Narendra Modi becomes the first Indian Prime Minister to visit Hiroshima after the 1974 Pokhran nuclear test. So after that, if India is visiting a summit which will be having those sensitivities of atomic bomb attached to it, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be sending a message that India may be a nuclear power and India may not have signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, but it remains a responsible nuclear power which believes in protecting its sovereignty and is not an aggressor.
Absolutely. That message coming to the fore, that's really going to be the theme as far as this weekend goes for the Prime Minister. Maria, thank you so much for getting us the latest from on ground there. We'll keep coming back to you, of course. But there is a lot that's planned for the Prime Minister over this weekend. There's a lot of business. There's a lot of cultural connect as well. Listen in to what the Indian ambassador to Japan had to tell us.
The G7 countries totally represent almost 47% of the global GDP and 10% of the world's population. I am in Hiroshima, where the G7 Hiroshima summit will be taking place, and India has been invited for the outreach session. There are 3 outreach sessions where Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be a participant. So what is on Prime Minister's agenda? With me is Indian Ambassador to Japan. Ambassador George, really appreciate your time on a bright day, and the weather is quite pleasant here.
Thank you very much. We look forward to the visit of Honorable Prime Minister to Hiroshima. As you are aware, in March, Prime Minister of Japan, Mr. Kishida, had visited India, met our Prime Minister and personally invited him to come to Hiroshima summit. And the invitation has been accepted and he is coming here. We look forward to the visit.
Particularly the significance of Hiroshima in the backdrop of an ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. You have an aggressive China and also the tensions in North Korea. Do you think the G7 countries will be able to send that important message of nuclear disarmament?
India always stands for peace. As you are aware, our position on Russia-Ukraine issue has been well articulated by our leadership in the past on many occasions, including at the UN Security Council when we were a member of the UN Security Council. So India always stands for peace. Prime Minister has made it very clear that this is an era of peace and not of war. That continues to be our position.
We stand up for shared values, including supporting brave people of Ukraine as they defend their sovereign territory and holding Russia accountable for its new aggression. And we're tracking the global challenges from strengthening our community and our commitment to nuclear non-proliferation to ensuring a free and open Indo-Pacific. That's at the heart of all this.
Now, one must not forget that Fumio Kishida's decision to host the summit comes with a heavy dose of symbolism. While the G7 leaders pay their respects to victims of the atomic bomb, hundreds protested outside the G7 center, urging the world to shun the use of nuclear weapons.
ये आप भारत को मैसेज दे रहे हैं, हे राम, परमाणु हथियारों को ख़त्म करने की भारत अंतर्राष्ट्रीय संधि में शामिल होकर हमें नर्क से बचाओ, ये कहा जा रहा है इंटरनेशनल. सो द मैसेज हियर, यहाँ पर बहुत सारे लैंग्वेजेस में मैसेज है और हिंदी में भी मैसेज है इनका कि जो परमाणु हथियार हैं वो डेंजरस हैं और उसमें जो ये कोशिश की जाती है ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा देश बढ़ाएं, अपना नंबर वो कम किया जाए. यहाँ से क्या मैसेज देना चाहेंगे आप?
दुनिया की पॉलिटिकल लीडर join a nuclear weapon ban treaty. This is message for me.
और हिंदुस्तान को क्या बोलेंगे? हिंदुस्तान, क्योंकि आपने हिंदी में यहाँ पे लिखा है, भारत को क्या बोलेंगे?
Indian government must join this nuclear weapon ban treaty and nuclear हथियार खत्म करना चाहिए